Hello and welcome or welcome back to another episode of Shoulders Down. If you're new here, I'm so glad that you found this podcast. My name is Leah. I'm a registered dietitian and body image coach and intuitive eating counselor. And I'm here to help you feel less anxious around food, stop fearing waking, and reclaim your precious time, energy, and brain space from diet culture. Before diving into today's episode, a quick reminder that I have an incredible free resource for you called the Intuitive Eating Starter Pack. And you can grab that resource by heading to the link in the show notes and downloading it. Or you can also go to my website and it will pop up when you arrive on my website. This resource has a bunch of tools to help you get started on your intuitive eating journey. And really, it's exactly what I wish I had when I first heard about intuitive eating. It can be kind of overwhelming. You don't know where to start, what to read, what podcasts to listen to. You have all these questions, and it is a single resource that organizes a ton of different ways for you to learn about intuitive eating from a registered dietitian and intuitive eating counselor. That's me. Okay, now for today's episode. Today's episode is inspired by an email I received from a listener named Janelle, and I got permission to share this openly on the podcast and use her name. And she's navigating a deeply personal and complex situation. So, Janelle is currently acting as a gestational surrogate. And up until now, she's been able to opt out of being weighed at her medical appointments. And she's had really great conversations with her midwife, who has been open to learning about health at every size and the anti-diet framework. But recently, I got an email from Janelle, and she was sharing how she learned that basically the hospital said that she has to have her weight monitored throughout her pregnancy. And they're mandating an initial weigh-in and then several check-ins throughout certain trimesters. Initially, she thought that she was going to be able to go through the pregnancy without having to do this. And now, because of insurance purposes and other protocols, she learned that she has to have regular weigh-ins. More specifically, the reason that they gave of why she needs regular weigh-ins is because of her advanced maternal age and the fact that she's carrying a pregnancy via IVF. They put her in a higher risk bracket and claim that they need to know her weights for monitoring complications like preeclampsia, heart issues, fluid retention, those kinds of things. So while Janelle understands the protocols, she's feeling conflicted. It's feeling really heavy for her because she hasn't stepped on a scale in over a decade. And the thought of being weighed has really stirred up some old feelings. And she's someone who struggled with restrictive behaviors and has some trauma from weight-focused environments like Weight Watchers, and ultimately just this deep fear that seeing her weight will re-trigger old disordered behaviors. And then there's this other layer that she mentioned in her email to me, basically, where she's carrying a child for a family member, and she feels this personal responsibility for her health and for the baby's health, and feels like seeing her weight will really challenge her because she has learned so much over the years that your weight is an indicator of your health and the baby's health. And she worries that seeing her weight will just be really activating and difficult for her. And she shared that while she intellectually knows her weight is just a number, that it's not a measure of her worth or her capability or her health, there's this emotional part of her that is still feeling triggered. The part of her, like the diet part of her, the part of her that has been steeped in the mainstream messaging in our culture. And the question that she really wrote to me asking is, how do I move from knowing that weight doesn't define me in my head to actually feeling that that is the truth in my body? Now, she's also navigating the added layer of spiritual messaging from her upbringing. She mentioned this idea of, her body is a temple and feeling responsible for her health and purity, which is now resurfacing in the context of being sort of like the home for her family member's baby. And she shared that she used to struggle with orthorexia, and I think her exact words were, she said that her orthorexic tendencies are quietly waiting in the wings, ready to creep back in. The reason why I summarized the question instead of reading it straight out is because we exchanged a few emails, and then there was different updates happening. So this just kind of summarizes the most recent update of where she's at. Um, she did send me one more recent update of what's going on, but I already outlined and planned this episode based on where she was at this point. So that's what we're gonna get into today. The question that we're really going to focus on is how do we stay grounded in body trust when weight monitoring becomes mandatory? How do we protect our peace in systems that still haven't caught up to the harms of weight stigma? And how do we stay connected to intuitive eating values in systems such as the medical system that feel anything but intuitive? Oh, these are such important questions. And even if you're not in this exact scenario where you're acting as a surrogate for a family member's baby, I think that there's so much more wider application of these questions, whether you have to get weighed at your annual physical or you get weighed for another reason. Basically, how do we deal with this? And then the added layer of how do we exist as anti-diet intuitive eaters within systems that still are operating from the weight normative frameworks. So the plan for the episode, we're going to explore these set of questions from two angles. The first will be more of the emotional angle. How do we manage this emotionally? And then we'll get into the practical side of like, okay, how do we do this? How do we navigate this practically? How do we set ourselves up for this to be the least distressing as possible? So with that, we're going to dive right into Janelle's question. Before getting into the nitty-gritty of this question, it feels so important to say that this situation is so hard. It really is a textbook example of the friction that happens when we bump up against systemic weight stigma. And Janelle, or anyone listening in a similar situation, this is so not fair. It's so shitty. And I can totally see how this would be activating and bring up old trauma and hard feelings from your days in the weight normative, actively engaging with the weight normative framework, whether that was in Weight Watchers or in other dieting settings. Weight stigma is real. Weight stigma in the medical system is real. It is not in your head. And there's no amount of therapy or journaling or anything that I'm about to say that can erase how painful it is to be dehumanized, really, by these systems. I think it's important that we just start with that. I'm going to give support, I'm going to give some tools, and this is still so fucking shitty, truly. Excuse my language, but that's how I feel. And then I also think it's important to give the context that while I've supported many clients through weight stigma and medical weight stigma, I always want to name that I recognize that I hold unearned body privileges. I exist in a straight size body, so I can empathize deeply. However, I haven't had this exact lived experience, so I will never truly know that pain and those feelings firsthand. The other piece that we need to cover before we get into how to navigate this from an emotional lens is just a reminder of the research. So the medical system places a disproportionate amount of shame on fat women in pregnancy. And I say fat in a reclaimed sense, meaning neutral, a body descriptor. And even though this is how the medical system is treating women in fat bodies, the evidence shows that the actual risks of carrying out a pregnancy as a person in a larger body are actually much more similar to the risks of carrying out a pregnancy as a woman in a straight size body. It's much more nuanced than the medical field has made it seem. Weight is not an indicator of how your pregnancy is going to go or your risk level. And if you want to learn more about this, I have a great episode with Nicola, who is from Fat Positive Fertility, I believe is her handle in her business. I'll link to that episode in the show notes, and we talk all about the intersections of fertility, trying to conceive, being a fat woman who's pregnant, and the actual research and the risks associated. So in Janelle's case, like she's not reckless for questioning the value of being weighed here because really weight is not an indicator of risk or health. So it's not like, in case you heard this question and thought, yeah, well, of course she needs to have her weight monitored throughout her pregnancy. Like that's like the healthy, safe option. That's actually less true than we've been led to believe. There are so many other factors that are key with monitoring the health of a baby. And certainly there are some cases where monitoring weight is warranted, but it's not necessarily always as necessary, again, as we've been led to believe. So that's just some context on the research going into this. Now for some emotional tools. The first thing that I would encourage you to do if you are in this situation or in a similar situation is to scale your distress. On a scale of 1 to 10, how distressing is the thought of being weighed? Once you scale your distress, 10 being the highest, 10 being like as activating as possible, 1 being not distressing at all, I want you to think on what is the worst part? Is the worst part seeing the number? Is the worst part your associations with the number? Is the worst part what you imagine that the medical providers will think about you because of the number? Is it something else? What is the worst part about this? The reason we want to go there is because we really want to understand what exactly feels so hard. There's so many components of being weighed that we want to really understand what is it exactly that feels the hardest. Maybe it's that feeling of feeling like you're back in a Weight Watchers meeting and all of the emotions that come with that. What is the worst part? Next, I want you to think on or journal on what emotions are coming up for you. Now, you can use a feelings wheel, which is basically a way to get more nuanced about the emotions that you're feeling, because there's actually really cool research showing that the more granular we can get with identifying our emotions, the better it can help us to cope and with resilience. So, what emotions are coming up for you? Is it shame? Is it grief? Is it embarrassment? Is it disappointment? Is it feeling isolated? Is it something else? Once you write those emotions down or take a moment to reflect on them, the next question I want you to think on is, what is the story I'm telling myself about my weight? What's the story I'm telling myself about what it means to see my weight? Now, this could look so many different ways. I think in Janelle's case, it sounds like the story she's telling herself is if she sees her weight higher than she feels like it's supposed to be, it sounds like the story is something like, well, then I'm not doing a good job of protecting the health of my family member's baby. I think sometimes the story could be something else. Someone might think, oh, well, if I'm higher than I'm supposed to be, then people are going to think that I'm lazy or that I'm not a good mom. Any different ways this might manifest, but it sounds like in Janelle's case, it's really coming from this fear of people, people will think I'm not doing a good job protecting the health of my cousin's baby, or I will think that I'm not doing a good job of protecting the health of my cousin's baby. Once we have this story, we are going to use 3 questions. And by the way, this framework of navigating distressful body image comes from one of my mentors, Bree Campos. And I'll link to Bree's episode on my podcast if you want to learn more about this kind of framework and approach to navigating body image distress. So once we have the story, we want to use 3 questions. Those questions are, is it kind? Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? The easiest way to figure out if it's kind is to think about, would you say this to a friend? Would you tell a friend you're doing a bad job as a surrogate because of your weight? Probably not. I think probably most people listening to this would say something more like, oh my God, it's an amazing thing that you're being a surrogate and you're helping to bring someone's dream of having a child to life. Like how beautiful. And like that would be more so the kind thing to say, but it's certainly not kind to say to someone you're doing a bad job as a surrogate because of your weight. Is it true? To me, when I hear this question, I'm like, oh my God, it is so not true. Like for Janelle, look at how deeply she cares. She's going to all her appointments, working with the trusted providers, educating herself and others. She has a midwife and she is cares so much that she wrote me a whole email about this and trying to protect herself and her mental well-being and her stress levels, which in turn protect the baby. She cares a lot. And her actions reflect that she cares. And also the fact that she cares so much about protecting her relationship with herself and food so that she doesn't spiral back into disordered eating and diet thoughts. That shows that she cares too, because it would not be healthy to grow a baby inside of you when you're engaging in disordered eating behaviors. That will put your body under stress. It could lead to inadequate energy intake, and it is harmful for yourself and the baby. So it is certainly not true. And then, is it helpful? Does shaming yourself for your weight change anything? Does it help anything? Or does it just drain your energy and keep you stuck? So, in Janelle's case, does saying to yourself, I'm not doing a good job at protecting the health of my baby or of my family member's baby because of my weight, does that help anything? It just leads to shame, and shame is never a motivator. Maybe sometimes for some people it is in the short term, but it ultimately leads us to feel bad about ourselves and to burn out, and it is never a motivator long term. So, no, it's not helpful. And even if it was something that might have led her to try and lower her weight, we know that pursuits of intentional weight loss are not sustainable long term 95% of the time. 95% of the time, they lead to gaining back more weight than was initially lost. So, this doesn't help anything. Her weight is her weight. Pursuing intentional weight loss is not an option unless you want to risk weight cycling. And so this doesn't help anything. It just makes her feel bad and drains her energy. So once we've gone through that piece of, again, scaling the distress, asking yourself, what's the worst part, figuring out the emotions that come with it, uncovering the story that you're telling yourself, and then using those three questions. Is it kind? Is it true? Is it helpful? Now we've collected some information, but like, what do we do? How do we move through this? Like Janelle asked, she knows cognitively, she knows logically that weight isn't an indicator of health or how much she cares about her family member's baby or her worth or any of these things, but she doesn't yet feel that in her body. So we need to work on that. One tool that you can use is something called the and statement. I've definitely spoken about that on this podcast before, but in case you're not familiar, I'm going to go through it again. The and statement is just basically a form of cognitive behavioral therapy that helps your brain to hold more than one thing at once. So, the and statement consists of a few steps. The first is to identify the emotion, how you feel, validate the emotion, use the word and then reframe. So, for example, this could sound like getting weighed feels terrifying and brings up feelings of shame, guilt, and inadequacy. These feelings are valid, and I'm working on unlearning the idea that my weight determines the health of this baby. Or it could sound something like, getting weighed feels terrifying, brings up shame and guilt. These feelings are valid. And I'm working on remembering that I care deeply about this baby's health, regardless of what the medical system says about my weight. So the purpose of the and statement is if we were just to say, my weight doesn't determine the health of this baby, or I do care deeply about this baby, regardless of what the medical system says, those are too big of a leap from where Janelle currently is. So that can lead her brain to just rejecting the reframe. It's like sometimes positive affirmations, too big of a leap. You're like, that's bullshit. I don't buy it. So instead, the and statement allows us to validate how she's currently feeling and then use the word and to bridge how she's currently feeling with a more realistic, impactful reframe. So instead of just like, my baby's health isn't determined by my weight, something like, I'm working on remembering that my baby's health isn't determined by my weight, or I'm working on unlearning the idea that my weight will determine this baby's health. Something that honors that you're still grappling with this, you're still in process of this. And what this is doing on a neural pathway level is it's helping your brain to literally dig a new pathway inside your brain. The brain is neuroplastic, which is so cool, which means you can form new grooves in your brain if you have enough repetition of a certain thought and You can also let old grooves overgrow, so to speak, with weeds so that they're harder to access. So what the and statement is doing is it's working to burrow a new groove in your brain. And every time you think that, it sends the neuron down that path again and again and again. And like walking the same pathway every single day in the woods or in the snow, you'll eventually beat a more walkable path and it will be easier and there'll be less resistance to walking that path because you would have packed it down and the trail will be easier to find. And that is the same thing with our brains and neuroplasticity. So, Janelle, if you can work on using the and statement as sort of an internal talk track when the feelings come up of, oh no, it's people are going to think I don't care about the health of my family member's baby because of my weight, or whatever those thoughts are, if you can pause and do a little and statement internal dialogue, identify how you're feeling, validate those feelings, use the word and then reframe with something that's a realistic reframe. Something like I'm working on, I'm open to, I'm learning, I'm unlearning, something like this. Okay, so we have the and statement as one tool. Another tool can be parts work. So parts work comes from a type of therapy called internal family systems. And it really is based off this idea that there's so many different parts inside of us, and those parts are all trying to work together and keep us safe, but sometimes one part is louder or getting in the way, and we need to kind of talk to that part so that we can keep moving through in the healthiest way possible for ourselves. So you could try to think about the part of you that is terrified of waking or terrified of seeing that number on the scale. And some people like to really get visual with this. You could try to think like, what does that part of you look like? When you close your eyes, do you see that part as a gender, as a shape? What is it wearing? I don't know. What does it sound like? Once you think about that part, we can kind of have a conversation. You can ask her, I'm going to call that part of her. Maybe it feels like gender neutral or masculine or something else. But for the sake of this example, what does she need? What is she trying to protect you from? Our parts are all there and they're trying their best to protect us, even though sometimes they just like make shit harder and get in the way. They think they're trying to protect us, just like that movie Inside Out. If you saw that movie, I think Inside Out 2, there was anxiety and she was like, I'm just trying to help, but like she ended up like blowing shit up and making everything worse, but she was trying to help. And that's the thing. All of our parts think that they're helping, but sometimes they're not, which is why we need to talk to them and figure out what do they need. Maybe this part of you is trying to keep you safe from the medical system, from being scolded. Maybe it's trying to keep you safe and help you find acceptance. Maybe that part feels like if your weight stays within a certain range, then you will have more acceptance or more access to care or something like this. And that's so valid. You can figure out what is she trying to do and validate her. And then we can kind of have a conversation with her. You can tell her, I know you're trying to help. In this case, it's actually really not helping. I appreciate you. I see you. I know that you were really trying to help me, especially back in my dieting days. And now this is actually just stressing me out and draining my energy and making things harder. So can you kindly step aside, sweet part? And whether you kind of move her aside, put her in the back of the car, the back of the bus, where she can still be along for the ride, but she's not steering. Just like in Inside Out too, I think they're like, okay, anxiety, you can sit over here. You're still needed. You're still part of us, but you're not going to have the controls over the character's emotions. I forget the character's name. So that's another tool. So now we have the and statement, we have parts work, and parts work could really help to feel more of that resonance in your body of like, ooh, yes, okay, I'm starting to actually believe that my weight is not an indicator of how much I care about this baby's health. That can really help with that resonance. And one other tool to help with that resonance is inner child work. So inner child work really is sort of hinges on this idea that we all have younger versions of ourselves within us. I think of like those little Russian dolls. So I picture um like my, I don't know, like my 5-year-old self is stacked within my 12-year-old self and then my 18-year-old self and so on up till my current day. And sometimes the reason why we don't feel resonance when we're trying to affirm something to ourselves, like my weight is not an indicator of my worth or how much I care about the health of this baby, sometimes what's happening is there's a younger version of us who is not on board, who's like, nah, your weight does determine your health, your weight does determine your worth. So we need to speak to that younger version to get her on board and create more resonance. So how you can do this is you can think about, when do you remember first learning that your weight equals your worth? And as just as an example for this case. And you can kind of bring your brain back to that time and ask yourself, what would you say to that younger version of yourself now? What do you wish she knew about her worth and her body size? Or another way to approach this is like, say you remember learning that your weight equals your worth at 8 years old. You can think of, do you know an 8-year-old in your life? How would you want to advocate for that 8-year-old if somebody was telling them your weight determines your worth? What would you say? What would you want to say? Often, these are the exact things that we need to be saying to ourselves in order to touch that younger part and get her on board. So maybe you'd say something like, you are inherently worthy, or your worth is not determined on your size. You can be whatever size and still be an incredible human being. Whatever it is you might want to say to that 8-year-old or whatever version it is of yourself that comes to mind, that can be another way to have more resonance. Okay, so we have from the top for our emotional tools, we have the and statement, we have the parts work, we have inner child work. All of these tools are possible ways to address the emotional side of this. And of course, if this feels like all quite overwhelming, I would recommend working through some of these things with either a therapist trained in body image and intuitive eating and anti-diet or a dietitian, because this can be a lot. It's like a lot of therapeutic, deeper work. Now for the practical strategies for navigating the appointments, the times that you have to get weighed, because it sounds like there will be multiple times throughout the pregnancy that Janelle will have to be weighed. I have 5 ideas for practical approaches here. The first is that I want you to come up with some kind of aftercare plan. When you know you're going to be weighed, if hopefully they tell you in advance, can we plan something that's going to help you feel restored and relaxed and help you take care of yourself for after the appointment? This could be something like a walk or like sitting outside on your favorite park bench or tea with a friend or watching your favorite show. Can we try and build in some time to help you recover in case it is really activating, and so that you can celebrate yourself for making it through something difficult? My next practical tool tip is to really call in your support system. Tell people in your life, how can they support you? Could someone come to an appointment with you? Could they be available on call for a debrief after? Could you consider working with a therapist or a dietitian to be a part of your support system, as I mentioned earlier, to help you have a professional to process these big feelings with? Support and community are everything. And the more you're able to lean on those people, even if it's just one person, or even if it's a professional who you're paying, that can make such a difference with feeling seen and validated and having a place to unpack all of the different feelings that are probably going to be a part of these multiple weigh-ins. The third practical tool to consider is you can ask the provider if it's possible to do a blind weight. So if it's possible for you to not see or hear the number, to go on the scale backwards, for them to not, say the number aloud after they weigh you, or put it anywhere on your medical chart that you could see it. Some providers are really accommodating with this, and that might be a good option, especially if it just feels too activating. This could be a really viable option to make it through this. Next practical tool, and I know Janelle has done some of this already because she mentioned it in her emails to me, pre-communicate with your medical staff. Let them know in advance if you feel comfortable that weight checks or weigh-ins are activating for you and that you come from a history of disordered eating and dieting, chronic dieting. And if it feels too hard to say these things yourself, you can consider asking your doula or midwife or a trusted friend or person to help you advocate, whether that's to write the doctor an email or to get on the phone with the doctor or come to the appointment and say these things. Letting the doctor know that this is activating for you or whatever medical professional can help to make sure that they're like not treating this lightly, kind of just like throwing you on the scale, like blurting the number out. I mean, maybe for some people that would help if it feels more casual, but I think in most cases, having the doctor be aware that this is hard for you can help to kind of just get it out in the open, at least for me. Like, I'm when I'm anxious, I like have to tell everyone that I'm anxious. Like I faint at blood work, and when I go to get my blood work, I'm like, okay, um, this is really hard for me. I get really worked up and scared. Like I'm going to do a lot of weird things to try and calm myself down. And the guy doing my blood work is like, okay. But it just helps me to get it out in the open instead of trying to act like everything's okay when it actually really is hard for me. The last practical tip is to have maybe a few go-to phrases. Like if you have someone in doing your weigh-in or a nurse or a nursing assistant and they're like starting to go off on your weight, if you have a few phrases in your back pocket, something like, I'm aware of my health risks and would prefer not to focus on the number today, or something like that, or I would prefer not to discuss my weight, it can help to kind of move the conversation along, hopefully. So that's something to think about. Janelle has written beautiful emails to her medical providers, and I think she has this on lock. But this is definitely something, if you're listening and resonating with this whole situation in any way, that might you might consider. Okay, so that is all for the practical strategies, which means that that is all for today's episode. In closing, I just want to say that, Janelle, again, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. The medical system can feel so frustrating and activating, and you deserve care that doesn't reduce your body size to a number. Now, while we can't control the system, the weight stigmatizing system, the medical system, we can control how we care for ourselves through these types of experiences. Every time that you choose compassion over shame, you are moving closer to a more healing approach with yourself and your body, and a approach rooted in self-care, the anti-diet intuitive eating approach. So, if you're going through anything similar, if you have a question like this, you can always write to me over email. And if you're comfortable sharing it on the podcast, I can of course remove any identifying details or make it anonymous altogether. Then I would love to hear from you. This was a really good question. Thank you for writing it in, Janelle, and wishing you the best of luck on your surrogate journey. I think it's such a beautiful gift that you're giving your family member. That is all for today's episode. I will chat with you in the next episode.